So we are on, and thank you, Stefan, Dr. Johan, Anna, and Vanessa for speaking at SDIN today. We'd love to hear your views on how service design does and doesn't work. So over to you guys.
Okay, thank you. So we will start by introducing ourselves briefly, and then we will go into the topics that we're interested in discussing today. And I'll start with myself, since I'm the first name there. So my name is Johan Blomkvist. I am senior researcher at Linköping University, and my background is in cognitive science and design, interaction design and service design mainly. And my main focus of my research so far has been service prototyping and how people act and think and how they coordinate their work around physical representations in design.
Right, and I'm Stefan Holmlid. I'm a professor of design here at Linköping University, and my background is actually in computer science and interaction design. Currently my main interest is in the meeting between multidisciplinary public sector organizations and design as such.
Hi, my name is Kustrak Korper. I'm a PhD student at Linköping University. My background is in business and management and musicology, and my research interest and the focus of my PhD is in studying service design as an innovation practice in technology-driven organizations.
My name is Vanessa Rodrigues. I'm a doctoral researcher at Linköping University. My educational background is in hospitality and international business, and I'm currently pursuing a PhD in the field of service design, particularly in public sector services.
Yes, and the topic, as you can see, is how service design does and maybe doesn't work all the time. So that's what we're going to talk about. And one of the things that we would maybe like to start with is that, of course, there are multiple interpretation of what service design is and what it means, and it means different things in different contexts and so on. And of course, that adds to the complexity of talking about a topic like this. But we have a few questions to sort of frame what we're going to talk about today, and we might not have very good answers, but we want to talk about them anyway. And the first question that we want to talk about is, how do we know what works? How can we understand what works about service design? And we will talk about some of the indicators or some of the ways we can see in organizations that service design is working. And then, of course, how can we know what doesn't work, and how can we plan, or how can we mitigate the problems when service design isn't working? And perhaps the most important question is, how can we make sure that when service design actually works, that it gets adopted by the organizations in which service design operates? So those are some of the questions that we are going to explore here, and we will use our insights both from research and from practice and research about service design practice. And the first aspect that we're going to talk about is time and how that relates to those questions. You're muted, Stefan.
Yes, but that's not the problem. It's not moving the slides. No. So, and this is an image that we landed from Justina Wink, which is part of this SDIN network, one of the former PhD students, now at AHO in Oslo. And depending on what we believe that service design is and what service design is doing, of course, the answers to what works and what doesn't work will take different forms. And that was also mentioned in the first service design speaker podcast, or whatever we like to call this thing. So a fundament for understanding how service design can and cannot work is the time perspective. If we view and believe that service design is the design of touch points and direct customer experiences, the time frame for making things happen and work is much shorter than if we believe that service design is part of a set of change practices that together will work towards changing whole systems. So this thinking about what service design is fundamental to understanding what makes service design work or doesn't work. And in what we're going to talk about today, we will assume a position where service design is more geared towards systems change than towards the more direct designs of specific objects. You maybe can walk us through that, Johan.
Yes. Yeah, so we have some images here, and I will talk a little bit about what identifies or what happens when service design is allowed to take place and take space in organizations and actually do design work in a proper way. And one of the ways you could see that, and one of the ways that this will be visible for someone, is that the org gets better at finding opportunities for collaborations. Maybe the organization becomes better at identifying value constellations that could be beneficial for the organization. The organization also starts to realize what it means to change and what is required to align the organization with an overall experience goal, for instance. And if you see that within the organization, then we sort of think that the reason why you can see that is because service design or design has been given the chance to work with service as part of a complex system rather than something that's very simplistic. So for instance, if you're expecting to see a customer journey map come out of those processes, then a customer journey map is a very idealized image of a service, of course, and that can have value in itself, but it's not representing, and it's not maybe really showing all the complexity of the system, of the service system. So that's one of the ways that you could see, and one of the reasons you could see that service design is actually working. Another way you can see it is that the firm has created some kind of understanding of the customers, maybe also of the competitors. You know what the frustrations are, what the delights are of the customers, and you will become better at predicting trends, and you can base strategic decision on empirical evidence of about your customer and customers and the context. And when you see that, we think that comes from making sure that service design has time for stakeholder research, basically. And that's a big challenge from what we've seen in our research, our own research about service design practice. And then another way is that, for instance, new services and improvements to existing services fit better with external stakeholders' expectations, and it actually addresses actual needs that customers and stakeholders have in these complex systems. And if you find that, then probably that is because you are allowing service design to involve different actors and to activate them using different materials and different designerly approaches. And the final or the fourth way you might see this is that you're able to find new and creative ways to co-create value This is something that we know from service design and other design disciplines also. Also, you would see that design deliverables are adapted both to the situation and to the specific domain that you're working within. And perhaps you could also see a little bit more speculative, a little bit more ambiguous and open representations used as deliverables within the organization. I think that is something when service design really has the power to work within an organization would be visible. So yeah, those are some of the ways that that you could see that service design is actually working in organizations.
And if some of these pictures, they are there to show some of these things. So the picture on the left it's a technique that was developed because there was a need to understand actor and time-based complex systems and how people and actors are interwoven through time. And it's a tool made up just because it was needed, not necessarily because it will be a perfect tool for any other kind of service or any other kind of challenge that an organization or a designer may meet. So it has to do with tool making, and that's the ambiguous and open and speculative way of thinking about these things and working with the materials as such. And you can see in several of these images, it's the material way of working is really, really important. And they are not necessarily fixed tools. They are used to give space. If you look at the middle pictures, they are tools made up to make space for people to share experiences. The second picture is about young immigrants being able to show what a home means. They were long-coming youth to Sweden. And the third one is a way of making sure that these young immigrants that have had not very good experiences on the way here can externalize their feelings and understandings of their own situations instead of having to direct it towards themselves. So that has to do with engaging people and making a lot of different voices become heard in these processes. And that's just they're just ways of showing that, well, if you see these things happen, probably it's not the thing in itself that is the important thing, but the capabilities that are needed in an organization to make those things possible to happen and influence the development. And I mean, this was all about what we see and how we can figure out whether service design actually has and if it works. We're going to talk a little bit about how service design may not necessarily be working or when it doesn't work.
Right. And sometimes in the best of cases, we've seen, especially from our own work, there's a lot of reasons why this may not go the way as planned. But one of the common things is not embracing the complexity as a resource. In this case, the organization might probably have a myopic or reductionist view of how service design might work and find only problems that pertain to customer experience. And they define their relationship with the design practitioners by viewing, for example, the customer journey map as a deliverable. If you see this happening, it probably also limits design efforts to a very surface phenomena without tackling underlying issues, especially those that are at the systemic level. The other thing that we've seen happening is the process being understood as very linear and phased. And again, this also ties into only addressing surface outcomes from design as something that should be implemented instead of as a part of a more complex change process. But what is needed is a shift to understanding this as an embedded ongoing feedback loop. And as the work of Justina Wink points out, there's also a need for reflexivity and reformation of the design process. And then There's also Anna, who in her research work has found some interesting bits about the implementation of service design. Over to you, Anna.
Thanks. So one other reason what we decided to include here, why service design doesn't work, or rather when it doesn't work, is when it doesn't become embedded or integrated in organizational innovation practices, or rather it becomes embedded more as a toolbox rather than a set of principles. When we talk about the toolbox here, then we can also, or I can relate to what Johan and Stefan were saying before. For example, organizations that predominantly see service design as a set of toolbox would use these different service design tools throughout the process as an end in itself. So for example, customer journey maps or other actor maps are there to kind of serve the purpose of having them along the way of the service design process. The reason why it has somehow the limited scope of integration in the organization and building the design capability on the one hand is because for some organizations, it feels it's more focused on ideation and not really on the concept development of the service, and especially not on the development of design capabilities. But also a restricted value of this kind of approach might also come from the fact that service design is then seen as not really aligned with certain strategic goals. On the other hand, when should service design work, or when do we see it's working in a sense that it brings more transformational change in the organization, is when it's embedded as a set of principles, meaning that it's understood through its human centricity, co-creation of value, the fact that it can really provide insight into more holistic and contextual understanding of service, and being understood as this emerging practice with a strong visual component. In that sense, the organizations who do integrate service design as a set of principles have a bit more broader approach in understanding value propositions, which doesn't mean that they don't appreciate the tools, but they use the tools more as an opportunity to explore, well, as tools to explore the opportunities for innovation and really understand value proposition from the needs in their wider actor network, rather than as an end in itself. So we'll go back to Stefan, I think, to have a look at what's coming ahead.
Yeah, because if we believe that service design is something that is important, or that could be important, the things we've been talking about is not only directed towards the designers, nor only directed towards the companies or organizations that are using design, or that wants to use designers, or hire design professionals, or include design as a practice in their innovation or development practices. It's about both, right? So there is a need to find mutual alignment. It's not only what designers are allowed to do, but also what they actually is trying to do. So there is a mutual alignment needed here. For example, on principles. What kinds of principles are beneficial for not only for design, of course, but also for from other perspectives, and how can those be integrated into design practices? It has to do with mutual alignment on the kinds of tools that are made and that are allowed to be used as part of that exploration. Measurement and evaluation, for example, what kinds of evaluation and measurement comes with a design approach, and what comes with other approaches, and how can find ways of mutually aligning those and maybe complementing each other. We also should set expectations higher maybe than what is done today. So on what designers should do, they should not only, if we're aiming for the longer time frames with systems change, we should set expectations on designers so that they don't deliver only customer journey maps as their final deliverable. They should be made part of a change process and make that actually happen. We also then, of course, an effect maybe even is that design capabilities will be built in organizations. And we may need to find ways of building them in certain ways so that also design is not only seen as a static kind of practice and a profession, but that profession and practice is also developing. So designers need to build their capabilities in being part of organizations that are embedding design rather than only being design consultants, for example. So this is what we see if we look ahead a little bit on where things will end up if we make sure that service design actually works. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everybody. We can open up for questions. I don't see anything in the chat, but I can go and start maybe. So one, I thought this was very interesting, and it touches upon how we can look at service design with a more broader, mindset. So the question is, how can companies integrate service design so that there's better alignment from within? And how can they use, so that's the second one, how can they use the principles and the tools together? Any thoughts?
Well, I'll chip in and just say that in a coming talk, there will be a little bit more on integration and embedding of design as a capacity and the capability. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, that's one place to look for more answers around that. But maybe Anna, you have some addition there.
So I did the research with technology startups who are not really service oriented, have a very strong technology orientation, and actually do their innovation accordingly. And we were trying to investigate how service design is useful in their innovation practices and whether it actually becomes embedded afterwards, after the projects are done. And answering your question, I think this understanding needs to come from both ways. So it's not only about how organizations understand service design, because some of them are actually introduced to it for the first time, but it's also how service designers can make sure that they do service design in a way which complements the organizational structure. For example, what we saw in our findings is that it's really dependent on the stage in the startup life cycle of what kind of effect service design can, let's say, produce. And it's really dependent on their strategic focus. So if they're too early in the technology development phase and they're not really focused on customers, they don't really have an understanding on value propositions, it would be very difficult for them to follow the process and to engage in collaboration that they need to engage in to actually understand the principles. On the other hand, if they're too far away in the process, if they're already growing towards matureness, if they're very focused on scaling up, if they're very focused on developing their customer base, this again will maybe be too conceptual for them to then see the value and the feasibility and the more business-oriented outcomes that they need at that stage. So from early or young companies that are technology focused, it's good if service designers think about their strategic focus and try to find a good way how to implement their knowledge in understanding different stakeholders, different actors in designing value propositions that actually do matter.
Thank you. We have one question from Ralph. So he's asking, given the complex, dynamic, and evolutionary nature of service, does it make sense for some service designers to set expectations towards niche markets and limited time horizons?
Thanks, Ralph, for the question. It's a really interesting question. I mean, what I'm kind of seeing there in that question is, of course, the fact that service design is not not a very well-defined professional practice. Much in the same sense, and it hasn't. I mean, it has developed over 20, 25 years or whatever. But just like with interaction design and UX design and all those things that happens around digital interactions, we will probably see service designers that will find certain ways of working, and they will complement each other. So there will be those that are working like in interaction design with pixel perfect design and whatever it is, like, right, specific interaction techniques and whatever. So that kind of service design we will find, but we'll also find those that are more on the systems change kind of horizon. So we will probably find service designers that does all these different things. I mean, probably we're already seeing it. It's just that we haven't structured that kind of knowledge yet. So I would say that, yeah, it would make sense. So there would be service designers that would focus on niche markets and those that would focus on other time horizons.
We have one more question. Yosina is asking, you mentioned that when people are too focused on a narrow, myopic part of a service system versus embracing the complexity of the system, that may not work. Do you think there are time cases that it is appropriate to have a narrow focus, or do we always need to focus on understanding all the complexity of the systems we are designing for in?
Any takers, Johan?
Well, I think that ties into the previous question to some extent. I think it's difficult to be a service designer in the organization, because the promise of service design and the strategic level at which it could operate is not so easy for everyone to just adapt to if they are young junior designers entering into an organization with all the politics and everything that's going on there. So, I mean, using a narrow focus and doing really well in that narrow focus is, of course, a good way to show that service design can do something. But then again, we don't want it to be too associated with making really good customer journey maps or making really fun workshops. We want it to be meaningful and useful on another level than that, I guess. So there is, of course, a balance that needs to be dealt with somehow, but I don't have a good answer for how to solve that.
And if I'm adding there, now I'm the picky guy. So the question is, do we always need to focus on understanding all the complexity of the system we are designing for/in? So the we there, I'm targeting that. I guess that you can be more without maybe even sacrificing the more longer term, the more changed perspectives. You can be more narrow. If we, in this case, then means the service organization, right? So if the service organization is mature in its understanding of service as a complex system and the idea that there is change going on, and when we then going in and designing smaller pieces, it fits into a larger idea about what change is. Then, of course, it's as a service designer, you can go in and do smaller parts without maybe sacrificing the idea that this service is a complex system. So so zooming in and out, yes, of course. And then the question, of course, then the question back then is, so who is responsible for the possibilities for individuals and an organization to zoom in and zoom out, and maybe even doing it at the same time? So there may be someone who is zooming out and another one who is zooming in at the same time, and still feeling that they're contributing to the same movement.
Yeah. So following up on that, or maybe not, I'm not sure, but we did ask design practitioners recently what they feel are limiting their ability to do their work. And one thing that we also mentioned in our little talk is this this challenge with organizations not providing them the opportunity to do, for instance, design research or customer research. So it's difficult then to do something that's really meaningful also. So it's also, service designers need to prove themselves. They need to show that it's value, that there's value in doing these things that we keep talking about. And at the same time, organizations need to take a leap of faith, I guess, and provide the resources for service designers to actually do lengthy things and do things that might require a little bit more resources. So there's definitely a tension there.
Yeah, thank you for adding that. And I just want to ask all the participants if anybody else has a question. Otherwise, our time is up and I don't want to keep all of you holding. Okay. No more questions then. All right. Thank you so much, Stefan, Johan, Vanessa, and Anna. And sorry, Vanessa, we missed out your name on the invite.
That's okay.
So apologies for that. Thank you all for sharing your perspective. Really appreciate it, and hope to see you guys on the next talk, which is next Wednesday. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.